Audio made possible by www.jackettome.com. Warning. The following has suggestive content that is not suitable for some listeners. Audio Fanfiction Productions presents Wide Awake. Fanfiction written by Angskata003. Fanfiction inspired by the Twilight Saga written by Stephanie Meyer. Chapter 17. By Brandy snaps, all in Bella's point of view. We woke up again without the alarm clock. The sun wasn't out today like yesterday, but it was still far brighter in the room than I was used to. I opened my eyes and peeked up at Edward, remembering how he looked yesterday. His face was mashed and all my curls covering his nose and mouth as he breathed. It made me smile brightly. He liked the hair. I don't only say that because he told me it was nice. I could notice him looking at me differently. In a good way. I hope. I shifted my head slightly, but found that it was being held still by Edward's fist, tangled into the back of all the girls. He definitely liked the hair. I laid there for a long while with my head on Edward's chest, rising and falling, just enjoying feeling him asleep, and so peaceful beside me, buried in my shiny hair. After what seemed like an hour, he finally began to stir, nuzzling his head deeper into my curls. I smiled into his chest yet again. I wondered briefly if he even noticed how much he liked my hair. He stiffened infinitesimally, then groaned and pulled away from my hair. Just like always. I rolled out of bed without another glance at him. I wanted the last thing I saw of him this morning to be his face nuzzled in my hair. When I caught a look at my hair in the mirror, I grimaced and smiled all at the same time. I grimaced because it was everywhere. All the curls knotted up. But I smiled because it was Edward's hands and face that did it. I packed up hastily, worrying that Alice might catch me coming in the door if I didn't make it home before she woke up. I set Edward's oatmeal cookies on the bedside table and left through the balcony, doing another sweep of the yard to be positive the coast was clear. Alice was still asleep when I got home at 7. I walked to her room to see if Jasper stayed again, but found her door wide open like it always was. I showered and changed, kind of glum about having to wash out all the girls, but remembered she made me promise her she could do it again. I'd take her up on that. It was such a small difference, but felt like it made such a big impact. I spent the rest of the morning waiting for Alice to wake up, wondering what I would do next. I made her breakfast as a thank you for the hair. At 8, she bounced into the kitchen, doing a little happy spin that made me chuckle at her. Her face was alight with excitement. "Good morning," she chirped, sliding into a stool and swinging her legs back and forth with vigor. I loved excited Alice. Much better than hungover Alice. I fixed her the plate of breakfast that had been waiting for her, and sat down to eat with her. She told me her and Jasper had plans next weekend, which didn't surprise me in the least. We were sitting and chatting and giggling like two normal teenage girls, and I was rather shocked when Esme stepped in the door. She wasn't supposed to be home until later that evening. She walked into the kitchen in her pantsuit, glancing at our giggling, and smiled at us. Her smile looked strangely bittersweet. "Hey girls, any room for an old woman in here?" she asked sweetly, slipping into a stool next to Alice. I nodded enthusiastically, and made Esme a big plate of the food we were eating. "Fancy seeing you here, Mom," Alice squeaked, still swinging her legs and arcing a delicate black eyebrow at her mother. Esme smiled at her and began picking at her food, not answering the unspoken question as to why she had arrived home so early. I warily took my seat and resumed eating, though all the giggling over Jasper had come to a screeching halt. We ate in a tense silence, Alice and I stealing curious glances at one another while Esme ate her breakfast. Finally, Esme set her fork down and daintily wiped her mouth with a napkin, finally meeting my gaze. "Bella," she started with a cautious look on her face. I immediately stiffened, wondering what was going on, and praying I hadn't gotten caught sneaking out of Edward's this morning. I got a call last night," she said softly, smiling at me reassuringly. But I wasn't reassured at all. Something was wrong. "Your guardian in Phoenix, Mrs. Lancaster?" she questioned, and I nodded, remembering the old gray-haired woman who had legal custody of me during my stay in Phoenix. Esme cleared her throat softly and tried smiling again, though it looked like a grimace, then shifted her gaze to her food. "Philip's trial is in week," she whispered into the plate. I clenched my teeth with an audible snap at the sound of his name and balled my fists up. She glanced up at me warily and immediately looked back down at her plate. "They want you to leave for Phoenix tomorrow to prepare to testify," she said softly, picking at her bacon. I stared blankly at her, blinking but not really knowing else to do. Because I knew I was going to have to face him again, and I really didn't want it. "How long?" I choked through clenched teeth, balling my fists more when I realized that I was going to have to break my promise to Edward and leave him. Esme never looked up from her plate. 12 days," she said softly, stuffing some eggs in between her red lips. I didn't know what Alice was doing, or how she was reacting. Because I couldn't focus on anything, I looked down at my plate and nodded with a grimace. My appetite was gone quite thoroughly. I slid out of the stool, without another word, and went to my room to pack. I pulled out my suitcase and began stuffing clothes in, not really seeing what I was putting in it, and not really caring. It wasn't like I hadn't expected this time to come. I had agreed to testify over a year ago, and now it was time to do it. I zipped up the suitcase in one sweeping motion, feeling numb. I sat carefully on the edge of my bed, staring at the closet door, and allowing a shudder to go up my spine at the sight of it. The truth is I never spent time in my room. Just enough to take a shower and get dressed every morning. Edward's room was more mine than this one was. With the blue walls and oversized king-size bed that I had only used once the entire time I lived here. Then I realized I was going to have to go 12 days without sleep. And so would Edward. I lied back softly onto the big blue bed that I never used and cried, rolling onto my side and bringing my knees to my chin. I sat there for a while before I felt the bed next to me sink down on either side. Then I felt 4 arms surrounding me as me and Alice. They sat there with me while I cried, and I heard sniffling suggesting that Esme was crying too. Alice gently lifted my head onto her lap and let all my tears soak her designer jeans, while Esme rubbed my back, crying softly with me. We sat there most of the day, just crying and dreading what I was going to have to do. I didn't think it was possible to hate Phil any more than I already did, but laying there on that bed, and crying with the remnants of my family before I was forced to leave them, I did hate him more. It was 5 in the evening. Before the tears subsided, I lied sniffling into Elisa's wet jeans, while she ran her fingers through my hair, telling me how pretty it was. I let out a choked chuckle, remembering my last sight of Edward this morning. Esme gently relayed to me my flight plans and arrangements while I was in Phoenix. It would be a hotel. And I was thankful I wouldn't have to go back to the group home. Mrs. Lancaster, the old grey lady social worker, would be staying with me. At 6, I finally dragged myself off of Alice, sending her a sad smile. It was the best thanks I could give. I cooked a lot. I made things that Esme and Alice could freeze and reheat easily. I made batch after batch of cookies, bagging them all up for the separate days I'd be gone in 5 different bags. It was the only calming thing I could do. My only solace aside from the one next door that would be waiting for me at 10, not expecting the news I was going to have to give him. At 9, I hugged and kissed Alice and Esme goodnight, sending them both thank yous for the bedroom episode, which they both shrugged off. She wouldn't come with me, and I understood. She had to stay with Alice, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Mother and daughter shouldn't be separated. I stuffed my old book bag with the 12 bags of cookies for Edward, and the dinner I had made for the night. I didn't look in the mirror at night when 10 came. I pulled my hood over my head.